Everyone hated No Man's Sky. It's a canonical fact of video games of the 2010s. Everyone hated it. The game was going to be an exciting and visionary new development for video games as a whole, with a quintillion different possible planets the player can travel to, procedurally generated with procedurally generated animals and procedurally generated plants, resources, maps, artifacts, locations, environments, and on and on and on. So no player would ever see the same planet twice, and no player would ever see the same planet as another player would. In the way of plot or motivation or game objectives, there was just enough to keep you going to the next planet, and the next, and the next. It was going to be about the experience of the infinite generated universe, not the traditional gaming product, but instead an exploration of what games could potentially become, and everyone hated it. No Man's Sky received a general all-round roasting by the game criticism community, everyone declaring it boring, completely devoid of fun, overpriced and broken, but at the same time it also spurred the creation of three of my favourite pieces of games criticism ever. H-Bomber-Guy's angry game smasher rant about No Man's Sky is hilarious.
I'm the Angry Game Smasher, and I'm here to speak truth to power and have opinions about video games.
Parodying the legitimate reaction tons of game critics had to the game, while also adding thoughtful and fun insights into the way the game makes you feel.
Hello friends, and this time I'd like to talk about the recently released highly anticipated game No Man's Sky. The game is a variation on the Minecraft or Terraria style loot gathering and crafting mechanics people have seen before, but with the central addition of an algorithmically defined universe of incomprehensibly huge proportions, populated with practically infinite variations of flora and fauna, in stark contrast to many space games which tend to feature lots of interactions with aliens and epic space battles. No Man's Sky lives up to its name by using its massive scale to tell a story surprisingly small in scope. The bulk of your time is spent exploring the worlds you encounter, which only you might ever see, discovering and naming unique animals, and waiting as your ship travels through the vast unfathomable emptiness of space. For me personally, this generates a sense of ennui and humility previously consigned only to obscure, poorly translated games from Russia, and is an experience so rare for video games that I fear many players may not have the capacity to even appreciate the attempt.
Dan Olsen's video, Alone in Public, is a deeply fantastic exploration of what makes No Man's Sky good. And while it doesn't ask you to like the game or try to win you over, the video does make a really good case for what someone might like about the game.
I love No Man's Sky, and I can totally understand why someone would hate it. Where it diverges from the typical is that over the course of hours, as the player encounters NPCs, uncovers lost relics, and unearths ancient mysteries, it is made quite clear that the player isn't just a convenient blank slate, they are in fact an outsider. The biggest expression of this is through one of the core goals of the game, learning the various words of the 4 species that inhabit the galaxy, because, you see, you don't speak their languages, and they don't speak yours.
Even the title is so deeply evocative and explains so well what feeling the game creates. Donkey's review of No Man's Sky is great because it's very funny, and also a good summary of what's actually very boring and unfun to a lot of players.
No Man's Sky? More like no guy bye.
But even more than that, it also sucks. And I love that. And let me explain.
Ever since Minecraft erupted in popularity, every shitbox developer has been trying to put their own twist on it. You got Minecraft with dinosaurs, Minecraft with crabs, Minecraft with rocks. Most of them suck complete dick.
It isn't just that Donkey's being the exact game critics that H-Bomber-Guy's video seeks to parody and Dan Olsen's video seeks to provide a refreshing alternative to, but within a very short time of the start, Donkey definitively declares,
with No Man's Sky, I was expecting that next big leap, except it fucking leaped backwards, way the fuck back.
And when I hear that, I just have to laugh like hell. It's not the traveling, gathering, collecting, or building mechanics that make No Man's Sky a big leap forward for games. It's the loneliness.
Life support power low.
The game is deeply, intensely lonely. It's like Depression Simulator, the game. And it's worth pointing out that the isolating, crushing loneliness of No Man's Sky is, even to those who fully appreciate it, a potentially awful experience. Pointing out what the game is doing well isn't the same as pointing out why it's actually secretly fun. The solitary protagonist is pretty common in games going back a long time, but games like Doom through the years have avoided a sense of loneliness, whether it be through the linear evolving plot, enough activity to keep the player engaged, or frankly the simplest method, putting more characters in to talk to. The Machine Games Wolfenstein Reboot series focuses enough on the relationships between the Resistance fighters that even when BJ Blazkowicz is alone, knowing who he's fighting for keeps you from feeling lonely. Horror games thrive off making the player feel lonely and vulnerable. The genre of games dubbed walking simulators like What Remains of Edith Finch, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, and Firewatch are, almost as an essential genre element, incredibly lonely. Loneliness can be used to make you afraid. It can also be used to make you reflect. In these genres, though, the loneliness feels incidental. It feels comfortable and expected, and maybe that's because loneliness is just a means to an end. We're here, and we need to get there. In horror games, loneliness is the road to fear, for example. So there has, of course, always been loneliness in games, ever since Fumito Ueda invented games back in 2005 with Shadow of the Colossus, but it feels like recently developers started realizing en masse how effective a little loneliness can be. Now, No Man's Sky might have absolutely nothing to do with this, but it really feels like this trend found its feet post-2016, and besides, I really like this story. Hello Games creates a game that everyone hates, but accidentally is so emotionally powerful that every serious artist developer in the industry was enchanted with this haunting loneliness. If there is a clear change, I don't mean to attribute the change all to No Man's Sky either. Even Minecraft, a game people can't seem to talk about No Man's Sky without mentioning, is itself intensely lonely, and I feel like that gets overlooked in favor of discussing the revolutionary effect the game has had in terms of popularizing gathering and collecting mechanics. The loneliness in Minecraft isn't necessarily good or bad. One player might find it idyllically peaceful, where another might find it desperate. One way or another, we've had more games with this deliberate, constructed loneliness. In the time since Minecraft and No Man's Sky, we've had open world games like Breath of the Wild and Horizon Zero Dawn that are deliberately empty and lonely and push you back out into the wilderness and away from society and the other characters. In both Control and Hellblade, you play not as the character being controlled by the player, but as a voice in their head. The character will make it clear to you who you are, whether you're welcome, as in Control's case, or unwelcome, as in Hellblade's. This is a unique spin on games you can compare these against, like Tomb Raider, because in these games you aren't alone as the character, you're alone with the character. God of War does something similar with loneliness, in that very few characters matter besides Kratos and Atreus. The game is really made in the moments when the father and son sit alone together in their little rowboat talking. The simple development of their dynamic is like a little play we watch while performing the menial task of steering them from point A to point B. Travel is a recurring source of loneliness, in fact, isolating characters from the rest of the world by the simple fact that they are moving on and the rest of the world isn't. The way this isolation works is that it draws attention to the falseness and emptiness of the simulated world by showing the player how much variation can look repetitive and tedious. This is probably why lots of players derisively called No Man's Sky a walking simulator. There definitely is a type of game where most of the gameplay revolves around the POV character simply walking through the world, observing it. But when people say walking simulator, they're more likely to be being derogatory. The irony of this insult is that it says more about the rest of video games than the ones being described as walking sims. In most people's real lives, the majority of spaces you go through contain objects you can interact with, information you can discover, and sights to see, and the vast minority of rooms you enter contain demons from hell or mecha Hitlers waiting for a boss battle. The other irony of the insult walking simulator is that Death Stranding, one of the most hyped and discussed games of 2019, is a game that actually does really focus on simulating walking. The illusory tactile feedback of moving in Death Stranding creates a low-key, stressful, and surprisingly intense experience out of walking, and also climbing. Maybe it's a metaphor. In the struggle to move around, carry packages, and keep your balance, Death Stranding is the first true walking simulator. Oh, maybe the second. Death Stranding's intense walking mechanic makes you dedicate way too much mental energy into the physical effort of moving this character around this enormous, empty map, creating an intense and powerful loneliness. But it uses loneliness in a very interesting way, because loneliness isn't ever really about the person who's alone, it's about the people they don't get to be with. With that in mind, Death Stranding's loneliness is specifically alienation. You can see other people, talk to them even, but most of the characters Sam Bridges meets and interacts with are just the holograms who talk to him in the lobby of their buildings. He's just meeting the illusion of the person who comes to the front door. Meanwhile, the alienation from the people Sam meets during his workday is contrasted against the solidarity to other players. Through the online mode connection, things you build can benefit other players, and things other players build can benefit you. So you get to feel connected to the people doing the same job as you. This is, in a big way, the point of the game, and of course why Death Stranding's creator, Hideo Kojima, has called it the first Strand-type game. The players are the strands coming together to make a greater whole. Who knows, maybe togetherness in games is the next big thing. No Man's Sky, more like, go to my Patreon, give me money.